Do you have a problem that you just can't fix? Maybe it's a chronic physical or mental illness. Maybe it's guilt for something in the past which you just can't change. Maybe it's your worry about someone you love's health or well-being. Or maybe it's a circumstance just beyond your control. St. Paul certainly had that, and he writes eloquently about it in today's second reading in 2 Corinthians, where he describes himself as having a thorn in the flesh, something which is metaphorical for a problem that he couldn't change. And St. Paul writes so beautifully about it, it's worth us exploring his understanding of what this thorn in the flesh was for him that might be of help to us too. We don't know what St. Paul's thorn in the flesh was. It may have been a physical ailment. It may have been something around the persecution he faced both from the Roman Empire but also from within the church. Many people have even written that maybe something around even Paul's sexuality because he writes with such a sense of repression in other places. We simply don't know what Paul's thorn in the flesh was. But we know it's something that he prayed desperately that God would take away, and yet God didn't. And so Paul had to wrestle with and understand what this was and how this could somehow be part of God's plan. Just as you and I might wonder, as we probably wonder so often, if we have a God who is all loving and all good, why doesn't God do everything he can to fix all the problems in my life? Are there sometimes things which have a greater purpose for us than being fixed? Well, St. Paul actually realized that there was. St. Paul begins the passage we hear in Corinthians by saying, to stop me getting too elated, or another translation says, to stop me being too proud, I was given this thorn in the flesh. Now, that's important for Paul, that's a big thing for Paul to admit, because Paul was pretty boastful at the best of times. Paul was that type A personality, that sort of controlling, authoritative person. When he was a Jew persecuting the Christians, he was absolutely certain that he was right about everything and everybody else was wrong. When he converted to become Christian, he was still convinced he was absolutely right. Everybody else was still wrong. He was that kind of character. Not much room for self-doubt in Paul. And yet perhaps this thorn in the flesh, this thing he couldn't overcome, became the way by which actually God broke in and made him softer, gentler, and actually far more effective at conveying the Christian message than he might otherwise have been. And Paul goes on to say then that although he begged God to take this thorn of the flesh away for him, that in the end, God said to him, no, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is greatest in your weakness. That's a very big claim. My strength is enough for you. My grace is enough for you, says God. My strength is greatest in your weakness. Now that can sound for some people quite jarring. It's almost akin to breaking a bird's wings so it can't fly, so it won't fly away from you or stay with you. Is God sort of hobbling people, giving people weaknesses and disabilities to somehow keep us close or dependent on him? I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the God of love whom Jesus reveals. And yet there's sometimes our own brokenness, our own need, becomes a thing which actually changes us for the better. Think about how many young people, for example, fail their driving test or have a minor accident that then makes them much better, more cautious drivers, perhaps preventing a future crash later on. How many people's first romantic breakup and heartbreak becomes a thing which actually makes them softer and more compassionate. In fact, so often, our virtues of compassion, of gentleness, are often hard won by our own experiences. If we know what it's like to be hurt, lost, scared, betrayed, what it's like to be lied to or to be neglected, those experiences can be things which actually make us realize, oh, that's what it feels like for somebody else, so I will work harder to reach out to them. For people who've never had anything go wrong in their life, they're often the ones who come across as quite brash and unapproachable. But for people who've had something in their life go wrong, they're the ones often you can find that gentle space within that connects. And I believe that is what God is doing. That God is saying, whatever our problem might be, that perhaps the space that actually makes us gentle, makes us in fact more human, less prone to perfectionism, less prone to judge others, because we know we too are not perfect. For myself, I'm asthmatic, and as a kid, it really kind of hobbled me. I couldn't play sport, and that really kind of damaged me, I guess, emotionally and definitely much socially as a kid and a teenager. But that kind of disruption to my self-esteem as a teenager is what made the space for me to know I needed God. When I went on a Christian retreat at age 15 and saw young people talking about their faith in Jesus and their love for him, I thought, oh, I don't have that confidence. I want that. And if following Jesus is the way to get that, then I'm all in. It was my weakness, my emptiness that I'd recognized that gave me the capacity to reach out, to invite God in a way that utterly has transformed my life ever since. And I think for many people, it is the thing that goes wrong in their life that becomes the point of conversion, the point of openness to God. All the great spiritual traditions of the world talk about overcoming ego or conquering the ego. And that's really around breaking our selfishness and our self-centeredness, our self-sufficiency. Jesus used the language of saying, dying to self. But the problem is, when it comes to surrendering our ego, most of us never surrender voluntarily. It takes that circumstance, that thing that we can't control, that we can't fix, to become something that actually takes us off our own pedestal, to make us step down, to look more humbly upon ourselves and others, to be open to the work of God in our lives. And so I want to ask you, do you have something which you can't fix, that you wish would go away, but it isn't? Is that perhaps already the means by which God is moving into your heart in more gentle ways? If it's not, I invite you to dig deep, to reflect, to pray, because maybe there is something in this experience for you by which God is inviting you to grow and change. A good friend of mine had the phrase from today's scripture passage written on his desk. It just he said, "When I'm weak, then I am strong." And that is the promise God makes to us, that is in our weakness, our seeming weakness, that in fact we become more truly strong. And I invite you to see if that is what God is doing in you. God bless you.